In this project report, we introduce a model for predicting flood inundation in urban settings. We use machine learning techniques to train a model based on a flood that occurred in Calgary, Alberta in 2013. We then used the model to predict what flooding might look like in Edmonton, a similar city to Calgary that is also in Alberta. Along the way, we provide an overview of the features included in our model, assess its performance, and discuss alternate approaches to modeling flood inundation. One popular method for predicting flood inundation is to create a bottom-up model. This process requires engineering a set of features like roadways, green space, and other environmental characteristics that are known to have certain effects on the flow behavior of water. After building these features, the modeler would then simulate how water would flow through and pool on the surface using tools such as HEC-RAS. This process, however, can be heavily resource intensive. Particularly complex bottom-up models require significant computing power, making them inaccessible to groups with fewer resources. In addition, a team of analysts must identify and engineer the many ground-level features and structures that influence flooding. This not only requires expertise on the part of the analysts and many person-hours, but it also means that models cannot be replicated easily across settings. A flood model for Philadelphia, engineered with Philadelphia's particular buildings, roads, and parks, would not be helpful for predicting flooding in Pittsburgh. Top-down modeling is an alternate approach to predicting flood inundation that is less resource-intensive and can be applied more flexibly to a wide variety of settings and environments. As the name implies, a top-down model works in reverse of bottom-up models. Such models compare the areas in a study region, such as a city, that were and were not inundated following a flooding event. They then identify the characteristics of the study region that were most closely associated with areas that flooded. The models then attempt to predict flood inundation in other regions using the insights gained from analyzing the original study region. In other words, it starts from a known outcome, identifies conditions that may have led to the outcome, and then predicts the likelihood of the outcome occurring in a different setting. Our model for predicting flood inundation is an example of a top-down model. In summer of 2013, Calgary, Alberta suffered torrential rainfall that caused catastrophic flooding in the city, leading to billions of dollars of damage. We develop a model that quantifies the relationship between the inundated areas of Calgary and several of their physical characteristics, such as their distance from the nearest body of water. We then use this model to predict flood inundation risk in Edmonton, Alberta, which has not experienced a significant flooding event in recent decades. A model like ours, if effective, could help insurance agencies or emergency personnel better understand the likelihood of certain parts of Edmonton becoming inundated, allowing them to allocate resources, develop mitigation strategies, and price policies more accurately. Furthermore, cities could use the model as a tool for educating potentially affected populations about the factors that influence flood risk in their city. First, we split Calgary into a grid of 200 meter by 200 meter cells and mark each with a yes or no for whether each cell was inundated. We also assign these cells with values for several physical attributes, such as stream order, that is the nearest body of water the main part of the Bow River or is it just a tributary? Water flow accumulation, how much rainwater in Calgary eventually flows into each grid cell. Relative elevation, how high is each cell relative to the lowest cell in Calgary? Distance to the nearest body of water. Is the cell mostly developed land with impermeable surfaces like roadway? And lastly, how far is the grid cell from a steep slope? We split the data into two parts. We randomly select 70% of Calgary to teach the model the relationship between our chosen variables and the likelihood of flooding in parts of Calgary using logistic regression. Having trained the model, we then use it to predict what happened in the remaining 30% of Calgary. Were those cells likely to flood or not? We set a high threshold for our model. The model should only predict an area to have flooded if it thinks that area had a 50% or higher likelihood of inundation. As this map shows, our model was very good at predicting where flooding did not occur, but it was not very good at predicting where flooding did occur, accurately predicting less than 40% of the flooded cells. Our model predicts flooding at the riverbanks, but not much further away from there. This curve shows the trade-off between true positive rate, that is, predicting flooding occurred where it did in fact occur, which our model did poorly on, and false positive rate, that is, predicting flooding occurred where it did not actually occur, where our model performed very well. Since our true positive rate was only 40%, this graph shows that we likely could have lowered the threshold for predicting inundation from a 50% likelihood to something much more sensitive, like 20%, without creating an unacceptable number of false positives. We then apply the model to Edmonton. Similarly to Calgary, the model predicts flooding in the areas immediately proximate to the river running through the city, but not much further beyond the banks in areas where one would expect flooding, like the inside of a river bend. One explanation for the conservativeness of our results is that including the waterways skewed the model. We treated the everyday extents of the rivers as flooded cells, which may have overamplified the importance of the distance from nearest water body variable. In future models, we would try excluding the everyday extent of the river from the inundated dataset. Our model displayed some of the strengths of a top-down model while also displaying its weaknesses. Top-down models can be very quick to generate and broadly applicable, making them appealing to users with few resources or those living in rapidly changing environments. Feature engineering, however, is a challenging exercise, and applying models trained in one context to another context comes with the risk of amplifying biases.